let's be honest, of boxing's incredible comeback year in 2023. One of the biggest delights have been the comeback of the great voice of the sport, Jim Lampley, back at it, pay-per-view.com this weekend. Of course, David Benavidez versus Benavidez-Andrade, the final Showtime pay-per-view event. But Jim, while we love that your relationship with pay-per-view.com and the great work you do with Lance Pugmire over there has brought your voice back, Brian Campbell, am fired up as always to chat with the great one right here. Jim, the sport has needed you for 5 years. You're back. How the heck does it feel?
Hard to believe that it really has been almost 5 years. It was December 8, 2018, when we did the last HBO boxing telecast. I would not have expected, frankly, that I would not have a position of any meaning or influence with regard to the sport for a long period of time. But I was very busy. I spent 5 semesters teaching a self-created course in the communication department at the University of North Carolina, a course about news media, not about sports media. And then eventually this new entity emerged. One of the things that I taught to my students in the course that I taught at UNC was the subject of how advancing electronic technology changes the nature of messages, the construction of messages, how the messages are received, et cetera, et cetera. And now here's a perfect example of it. PPV.com is something new, where Lance Pugmire and I sit together at ringside and share observations in text, not my voice, but my words, and invite those who are viewing the pay-per-view telecast of the boxing match to share with us and express our opinions or impressions as to what's going on. And so the first time that I did it was Canelo versus Charlo and the undercard there, and now getting ready to go back to Vegas to do it for the second time with the elder Charlo brother on the undercard. So it all is so far kind of a unified experience. And thank you very much for your compliments. Thank you very much for your enthusiasm that my, quote, voice is back. Some viewers were a little surprised and in some cases disappointed that they weren't hearing me auditorily the first time around. That's not the nature of this particular medium. Some were complimentary enough to say, when I look at your words in chat, I can hear your voice. So I hope that resonates with a larger number this time around.
Well, are you interested in this particular factoid in your return here and why people are so excited? Your voice is known as the soundtrack of boxing over your time presiding with HBO pay-per-view, and that legendary run that so many of us, grew up with. It was such a fertile point in us getting into boxing, but you were the ringleader, the traffic director, the voice of reason in some cases. Now we're looking at you as veteran analyst. And Jim, in a lot of ways, there's always that one big name in an era who's been there and seen it all. It used to be Burt Randolph Sugar. It was your great colleague Larry Merchant for years, where it's like, we need an opinion on what's happening right now. Let's go to the guy who's seen it all and done it all. That's becoming you. How do you feel about that, where you're almost turning to analyst at this point in your career, where we just want to know, what does Jim think about the business today?
Well, I think you know me and understand me, and that becomes clear from that particular comment. During the last several years that I was calling fights on HBO, I often had this sense that at some point I should get up and move around the expert commentator, Roy Jones, and go take Max Kellerman's seat, and he should get up and come around and take mine. That a logical transition in the ongoing evolution of that telecast would have been that I would become the Larry Merchant / Max Kellerman figure, and Max would become the blow-by-blow guy. And I thought that would have been great for his career and great for mine. Max went in a different direction. I certainly hope that someday we have him back in the fight game, saying what he has to say and offering us his wisdom and experience. Max and Roy and I were all blindsided by the sudden exit of HBO from boxing in 2018. And I'm just tremendously grateful to the existence of PPV.com. It didn't exist back in those days. And the executive branch at PPV.com, Dale Hopkins, Mark Mercado, and company, for having gotten together and reached out and said, hey, come back. We've got something for you to do. And the response of people like yourself and various others in the boxing world. I was at a Jerry Seinfeld show in Durham Saturday night, watching Jerry Seinfeld live. And I got a text. And the text was somebody showing me what Oscar De La Hoya had said on a social medium about needing me back on the microphone. That's so thrilling. That's so complimentary to me. That goes back all the way to 1992 when I first met him in Barcelona. So yeah, it's a great thrill, and it's great to be back, and it's great to be talking to people like you every time I get ready to go into one of these engagements, so that we can discuss the fights and set up what it is we think we're about to see.
Well, I appreciate that, Jim. And I've always said it. We're all just doing our best second, third, and fourth rate Jim Lampley impression in terms of when we get into this business and our goals and aspirations, then hopefully we find our own voice and find our own spot. But let's talk about where boxing is at. About 5 years since you have been a day-to-day, week-to-week voice, what do you think has been the biggest change over that time to what you see now?
You know, every once in a while, I'll read somebody make a boxing is dead comment. And I always point out to people, boxing has been dead for 120 years. I can't, as Larry Merchant said, can't fix it, can't kill it. You know, it's in a constant state of evolution. And right now, all of the overarching and in some ways dramatic changes that are taking place in terms of electronic media are deeply affecting boxing and affecting the day-to-day flow of boxing. Of course, now via social media, you have an ongoing dialogue among athletes and between athletes and other sports of the kind that has always existed through the media in boxing, because you know boxing is the sport where you would fight, and then as time went on, you would go months without fighting, and you'd have to spend those months expending your energy talking to your potential opponents or your upcoming opponents, and setting up the combat in that way. Obviously, everybody's still doing that, but now people are doing it in pro football and pro basketball and various other sports via social media. They imitate fighters in the way that they talk to and about each other. I think that it's confusing to the American public, and it has been for years now, not to have a dominant American heavyweight champion. Traditionally, in my childhood, even into your childhood, that was kind of the linchpin for public interest in boxing, and then it would migrate or proliferate outward from there. We don't have a dominant American heavyweight champion right now. And when people read about a potential heavyweight championship fight, it's likely to take place between British or Eastern European fighters in Riyadh. So that's exotic, and that's something new to inculcate. The enormous influx of Hispanic immigrants into the United States has been accompanied by the enormous influx of Hispanic fighters in American boxing. And part of what's exciting about this card is that particularly David Benavidez, but also his brother, are representative of that tide of incoming talent into the sport. And there are possibilities in David Benavidez' future which could make him one of the biggest stars ever if he were to fulfill all of his potential and his destiny. But of course, in order to do that, he has to win Saturday night. So I think that it's always a mixed bag. It's always a varied picture. It's always a complicated landscape. One of the things that I think I tried to do when I was in my position with HBO Sports, and now will continue to try to do with PPV.com, is to navigate all of that, navigate both the geographic and the population disparities of boxing and all of the personalities that represent different outposts in the sport and their conflicts or their sometimes friendships with each other, and explain all that in human terms so that people can understand what they're watching when two men get into the ring and face each other.
So true. And when you look at where we are exactly right now, some of these changes have been coming. You've seen the transition from the end of your days on HBO, meaning, look, is there too many fights on pay-per-view? We could have had that discussion 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But it almost feels like there's no longer a boxing middle class in the way that, at least from an American standpoint, we present boxing. You don't see an HBO or a Showtime. Heck, you're not going to see either one in business after this calendar year at all, but you don't see them putting up the $4 or $5 million, A-side site fees to make these, let's say, non-pay-per-view fights, but important fights that fans need to see. Now in this calendar year, right, we're also seeing Saudi Arabia become a major factor as someone who can infuse, in theory, more money than other promoters or networks to make the big fights happen. What does Saudi Arabia represent for you in this transition? Because we've seen people come in and out of boxing with deep pockets in the past. Sometimes they hang around and make big impacts. Sometimes they're fly by night. Is Saudi Arabia here and having an impact because they have the most money, or has boxing's network landscape kind of conspired over the last decade and a half, 2 decades, to kind of open up this need to where we need somebody with deep pockets to make an Usyk versus Fury that might not otherwise be able to be made?
Saudi Arabia is in the position that they're in with regard to boxing because A, they have as close to the most money as anybody else, and B, they are a totalitarian system that can do whatever they want to do. There's no widespread public or political pressure to force them to do something else with the money other than to entertain. And so that's why Saudi Arabia is in the position that it's in. As far as a boxing middle class is concerned, there's practically nobody younger than me who can even remember what a true middle class was in boxing. Look, that's the days of the Friday night fights on Gillette. Or before that, the days of club fights on Saturday night in cities all around the country, from Youngstown to Bakersfield and back. The boxing revolution toward a more plutocratic society took place starting in 1971. The moment that Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali went into Madison Square Garden to face each other for sums of money that had never before been anticipated. Larry Merchant used to tell me the story from his seat at ringside in Madison Square Garden the night of the fight of the century in 1971. Ali got to the ring, awaited Frazier's entrance because Frazier was the ranking champion at the time. And Larry swore to me that as Ali was in the ring, bouncing up and down on his feet, warming up, waiting for Frazier, what he was saying out loud over and over was $2.5 million. $2.5 million. He couldn't believe that for one trip to the ring, he was going to make that sum of money. That's where all of this began. Are there too many pay-per-view fights? There are as many as the market will bear. And yeah, sometimes something bombs and doesn't get the buy rate that expected. At that moment, yeah, there are too many pay-per-view fights. But when something gets the audience that it wants and the fighters get rewarded the way they want to be rewarded, then no, that's the right number of pay-per-view fights. So it's all in a constant state of transition. And it's only because of the constancy and the indelibility of the sport itself that we even still see these events and see these cards. And one thing I always say to people who talk to me about the perishability of what I'm doing, or the perishability of boxing, I say, look, as long as human beings can stand up and walk on this planet, people are going to fight each other for money. It's as simple as that. It's the simplest and easiest kind of sports event. It's totally intelligible combat. any fan who looks at a boxing match for the first time thinks, not necessarily justifiably, but thinks he can understand what he's seeing. And it's that kind of open invitation to a constant audience that makes boxing what it is.
One quick follow-up to that. How do you think we got here specifically where HBO has shut the doors? Now, Showtime, unfortunately, shutting the doors. We all expect a big transition for Al Heyman and Premier Boxing Champions to find very profitable new life where the sport will continue. But did we get here because fighters were receiving too big of fees for lopsided matchups 10 years ago? I mean, how did that transaction begin to take place?
I wish I knew. If the management under which I worked for upward of 30 years had stayed in place at HBO, then HBO would still be covering boxing. I'm pretty sure of that. I can't say it for certain, but I'm pretty sure of that. The death of boxing at HBO was totally specific to the purchase of Time Warner and within Time Warner, HBO, by AT&T, a bunch of telephone salesmen from Dallas who weren't interested in that kind of business for whatever their reason was. I still, to this day, couldn't specify to you what it was. Now, Showtime, another owned entity within a larger conglomerate, is going out of business, not because of the decisions that are made by the management of Showtime, but the decisions that are made by the management of the parent company. And I haven't spoken to the managers of the parent company, just as I never spoke to the managers at AT&T to say, why in the world are you backing out of this? All I know is that for whatever reason and by whatever metric they measure these things, they've decided that it doesn't fit anymore. And again, as long as men can stand up and walk, people are going to fight each other for money. And somehow or another, it's going to appear in some electronic communication stream somewhere. Now we hear rumors if I go into the media room this weekend in Las Vegas, I'll hear rumors about Amazon. I'll hear rumors about Apple. These are the popular discussions that are ongoing at this moment. Do I lend any credence to that? Do I have any expectation that that means something is going to happen with regard to Amazon or Apple? I have zero idea. I really don't know. And unlike what was always the case in the past, I don't have representation. I don't have a manager or an agent who's out there digging to find out. If I'm going to find out anything about that on some direct personal level, it's going to be my cell phone that rings. Hello, how are you? And that's the way I'll learn. But to this moment, barring some revelation in the media room this weekend in Las Vegas, I don't know anything at all about who's next in the door. I only know from past experience, it's not going to stop. Yeah. Men are going to keep fighting each other for money.
True.
Electronic communication is still going to find a way to show it. That's been the case ever since I've been alive, ever since my mother put me in front of a television set in 1955, 1 year after my father died when I was 5 years old, when I was 6 years old, when she sat me down in front of a TV set and said, sit here, you're going to be watching Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship. It's their second fight. And I've been watching and listening to people talking about boxing ever since.
I feel like all of us in some ways are connecting with our fathers through boxing that have stayed with us, because that's the only sport my non-sports loving dad ever got excited about and tuned in for. So I still, even though my father's still living, we have a great relationship. I'm still oddly connecting with him through the sport of watching boxing.
That's the most familiar and repeated story among boxing fans, Brian. You and I share something together. In my case, it was because my father had died when I was so young, and my mother was, in effect, replacing him in my life by saying, sit down, watch this black and white TV set. In the next hour, a man named Don Dunphy is going to tell you everything you need to know about boxing. That's how I got started. And, I, to this day, 5 years after the last HBO telecast, I walk down Fifth Avenue in New York, and people will come up and stop me and say, thank you so much. You through my father taught me about boxing. He made me sit down and watch. I learned from you. I get that all the time. It's very thrilling and it's very resonant within the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I only have a few more minutes with you, Jim, and I could pick your brain a million ways. Let's talk David Benavidez. He's back. The final Showtime pay-per-view Saturday night. Man, do we love this matchup, because Benavidez-Andrade has been waiting for this moment for years, and we know he's difficult. But about Benavidez, when I saw him walk into the arena in Vegas in March to fight Caleb Plant on pay-per-view, I heard an explosion from the Mexican fan base that essentially was saying, we love our Canelo. Believe me, but there's something about this guy that we're ready to throw all we have at him. What is it about this guy that those fans have said he's our next one, the Mexican monster?
Charisma. Simple as that. He is charismatic. Why is he charismatic? Number one, he's a puncher. That's the number one most beloved style of fighting for the average fan. People want to see somebody who goes to war. He calls himself the monster. He fights in a go forward, destroy your style. And most fans identify with that and love that. Number two, he embodies and represents the Mexican American, Latino American constituency, which is the largest demographic support of boxing right now. And he's handsome, and he's intelligent, and he speaks in clear, understandable sentences. He's not just spouting gibberish up there. So he has a lot of attractive qualities which put him in the position that he's in. And then there's, maybe for some fans, I don't know if they've even thought of it, there's the overarching large dream, which is when he was 13 years old, he lost 80 pounds to get himself into position to become a competitive athlete. What does that mean? It means that his body has already at one point in his life been in a heavyweight envelope. A Mexican-American heavyweight contender would be not just the biggest star in boxing, but one of the biggest entertainment commodities in the world. We haven't seen it yet. I used to, in my contract days at HBO, I had a contract to attempt to develop drama programming. And I had two separate attempts at developing a drama series about a Mexican-American heavyweight. I didn't get either one of them to the screen, but it was an ardent hope of mine. Now here he is. If he can fulfill that destiny, and he told me in an interview last week, yes, it's in the back of my mind. I've thought to myself that it would be interesting if I could go super middleweight, light heavyweight, cruiserweight, and make it to heavyweight. Like I said, you're talking about the biggest star in boxing by a fairly considerable margin if he were to fulfill that destiny. But step one is, can he beat Andrade in a classic style matchup against a southpaw counterpuncher? Nobody runs to fight the southpaw counterpuncher. That's the last kind of fighter you want to see across the ring from you. And Benavidez has stepped into that willingly, openly, et cetera, et cetera. But if somebody were to tell me Andrade is a sure winner in this fight, I'm not ready to dispute them openly and say you're crazy. Andrade can win this fight.
I agree. And we can get your thoughts. PPV.com live chat during the fight this Saturday with the affable Lance Pugmire. We all love him. But Jim, I'm going to get greedy and steal 60 more seconds from you. It's not your fault, but you've authored one of the greatest, all of the greatest seemingly modern boxing catchphrases. Shout out to Steve Albert at Showtime. He had some great one-liners too. But everybody talks about it happened, George Foreman, Michael Moore, but the real ones, when Ray Flores and I, a fellow aspiring broadcaster, talk about our Aunt Lampley's greatest hits, we go right to De La Hoya Vargas, 2002. So I want to close with this, Jim. That's your most emotional call, but I think it's the timing. You timed that long preamble to the exact second that Oscar stops Vargas on his feet and gets the most triumphant victory in his career. The timing was everything in that one.
Well, I think I talked too much. I think there were too many words in that package. It's not perfect. But yes, I did manage to tell that story as Oscar was closing in, as Oscar was surging and getting toward that moment. I said, something to the effect of, if he could knock this kid out, if he could button his lip after all the things that have been said about him, if he could land that one big left hook.
So
and at just about that moment, he landed that one one big left hook. Excuse me. That was always Oscar's money punch. I said many times on the air, he came out of the cradle with that left hook. That's born, not made. It was so natural. It was so beautiful when he threw it right, and it knocked Vargas out. And Fernando's one of the best friends I've ever had in the sport. But I could feel it coming. I could see it coming. And I appreciate that you and your colleagues appreciate the call, because, yes, there are fans of it happened. There are fans of Mike Tyson's been knocked out. And then there are fans of De La Hoya Vargas. And all of them are precious and memorable to me. I'll be honest about that.
Well, we laughed, we cried, Jim. Great to have you back. PPV.com this Saturday. Andrade, Benavidez, Showtime pay-per-view. They can get your live instant analysis and thoughts during the fights. Jim, it's been a pleasure. Great seeing you back. I only hope this is the beginning. And if somebody offers you a microphone in 2024 to call the fights, I'll be ready to be watching. I'll be in the front row. Okay, Jim, that's how it works. All right. Thank you.
I expect that. I expect to be working for PPV.com. So thank you very much. And I really enjoyed talking to you, Brian.
Thank you.